One. Welcome back, everybody, to part two of our conversation today with Jeremy Opperman. All right, part two. You're also passionate about audio description, that whole wealth of knowledge that you have in audio description. I'm not concerned if you're able to talk about it because I know you are. So let's just dive deep into this one. Audio description, go, and we'll just dive in. And you have about 57 minutes for this one. So just go for it. Dive straight in. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I am not an expert in audio description. I'm a devotee. I am a passionate devotee of audio description. I'm a user. And I do some audio description myself very early, very, very early. I'm able to talk passionately about it, and because I love it so, and because I have a very vivid imagination, and because of my reading, I suppose, I have a grasp of things that would be lovely to see if you could see. And so I have a sort of motto, if you like. I call it the things we miss. And I'm not sure when I became conscious of the things we miss. You know, we in Cape Town, we have a big mountain right in the middle of the city. I don't know if you know about Cape Town, that we have a mountain. And let me describe it to you. In fact, that's part of audio description, isn't it? So we have a town which was centered initially in a bay and on the one side of an iconic looking mountain. So for those of you who don't know what Table Mountain looks like, picture a, a mountain about 2 miles wide. On the left-hand side, you have, and this is facing the mountain with the sea to your back. In the back, the sea is what's called Table Bay. And essentially, it's facing the Atlantic Ocean. And if you go 3,000 miles due west, you will hit Brazil. You'll literally hit Rio de Janeiro. So that's where South Africa and Cape Town is geographically. Now, with your back to the sea and you look towards the east, you will see, if you could see, a mountain. On the left, there is a peak, quite a sharp peak. It's exactly 3,640 feet high, which is not terribly high from mountain points of view, but you must remember that you're at sea level now. And so many mountains which are higher, so your McKinley, for instance, your Mount McKinley, which is, I think, your highest mountain, is 17,000 feet. But what you must remember is that you're not starting from sea level. You're already starting from quite high up. You're starting from well over 5,000 feet before you even begin to climb McKinley. So that just gives you an idea of relativity. But in Cape Town, 3,640 feet odd is a left-hand peak. And it's a typical conical peak, really. It's called Devil's Peak. Immediately to its right, and spanning about a mile, is an incredibly iconic looking mountain because it's flat, which is why it's called Table Mountain. And so the what's called a saddle, or the valley between Devil's Peak and Table Mountain, is quite high up, but it's a classic valley or a classic saddle or a pass, if you like. Um, and so then you have this Table Mountain. Now the mountain is slightly less than 3,640 feet. I'm not even sure of what it is, but it's over 3,000 feet. Once again, it's right next door to the Devil's Peak, so you're looking at it. So on the left-hand side, you've got the conical peak of Devil's Peak. Immediately to the right, spanning about a mile, which is 1.6 kilometers for those who use the metric system. You've got the flat-topped mountain. Now, when you get up there, it's not quite as flat as you can see from the ground, but it certainly looks flat. It's almost level. If you put a spirit level on it, it would feel like it was level. And it's extraordinary. It really is incredible. And then after about a mile, there's another valley, or a pass, if you like, slightly lower this time. And then you get to another, not quite so conical, but a classic mountain shape, which is called Lion's Head, and which is made up of a taller peak and then a slightly lower one, the mountain part, the lion part, by the way, is when you look at it from certain angles, the one part of the lower hill, which is called Signal Hill, resembles the rump of a lion, and the rest of the lion. So it looks like a bit of a lion from a certain angle. Apparently, even when I could see, I couldn't work that out. Not that I could ever see well. Now, so that's Table Mountain. And it dominates, obviously it would, it being about 2 miles wide, it dominates the entire vista of of Cape Town. So when the Dutch came in 16, they came literally to colonize in 1652, but the Portuguese came as early as 1480. And when they first saw this extraordinary mountain. And so it's iconic. I mean, it's one of the UNESCO natural history sites. So that's an example. So as a boy, I could always see the mountain. It was my friend. And the city, of course, grew around the mountain. And so you get the different perspectives. On the side, you don't see the big flat top. You only see Devil's Peak, or on the other side, you see something else. And then when you go to the back, you don't see the flat top quite as much because the vista of the mountain changes. But I think I'm going back to history, but I'm not. What I'm getting to is audio description, because what I'm telling you is what people have told me. I could perceive the mountain only to a degree. It was only ever a silhouette. I could never see the detail. But what fascinated me, because I was at a school which has a gorgeous view of Devil's Peak from the, let's see, west, east, so it would be from the northern side of the mountain, the suburbs surrounding the mountain in the north slightly. Still in the very early slopes of the mountain, is the University of Cape Town, which is probably one of the most attractive universities in the world. If you were to Google a picture and you could see well enough, I dare you to do it and to defy it. It's on the slopes of Devil's Peak. It's steep, and it's built in the early 1900s, or the early part of it, and so it's got columns and marble steps and stone buildings, gorgeous. Anyway, my school was about 2 kilometers, about a mile and a half from the university. So slightly flatter ground, but you could see up to this extraordinary mountain. And my friends would always say during wintertime, oh, look at the waterfall, look at the waterfall, or look at the Rhodes Memorial, which is a memorial site. And they could see it and I couldn't. And so I became reliant on their stories. Describe the waterfall, I would say. In 1974, we had a tragic accident of 3 military airplanes crashing into the mountain in the fog, one after the other, right above the university. Bang, 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 bang. And we could hear it. And there was smoke. Even though when the fog cleared, there was smoke. Could you imagine 3 jets? They were Impala jets. And they all, no, I lied, they were Buccaneer jets. And they all crashed into the mountain. And even when the cloud cleared and the smoke cleared, and the fog cleared, you could see the smoke. I couldn't. They could. And so audio description is something I've grown up with. I was enormously curious. And so, I would ask and ask and ask. I must have frustrated the hell out of my parents and my friends because I constantly said, describe it to me, tell me about it. So that's my first impression of audio description. And then, of course, there came television and movies. And so I could never really appreciate movies. I didn't like movies particularly because I could never really get them. I would have to sit very close, and my friends and family didn't like to sit in the front row. And even if I did sit in the front row, it was too close, really. And so you only got part of the action, and we could never appreciate the action as such. So I was drawn rather to illustrated things that I could see, like those comics I spoke about. So people had to describe stuff to me in the movies, which of course frustrates everybody else in the movie. I would say, what's happening? What's happening? What's happening? And I remember when I was at university, we were watching The Clan of the Cave Bears, and I was with my friends, both women and men, and I was saying, what's happening? What's happening? And the scene in the movie happened to be quite an intimate scene. of a sexual nature. And the girl I was sitting next door to was too shy to describe it to me. I'll never forget that. And so as blind people, we are all exposed to audio description all the time, particularly if we're curious. Um, and the more curious you are, the more audio description you will be subjected to, if you're lucky. So I want to fast forward really to my first formal um, interaction with audio description. I was extraordinarily lucky to meet the father of audio description. Now, I want to introduce another individual here into the story. So I have a friend, a blind friend, someone you might want to interview as well. Her name is Shakila Maharaj. And Shakila is an interesting woman in her own right. She did psychology at university, and then she did her master's at Columbia in New York. And Shakila has, followed a corporate degree, but like me, she was fascinated by audio description. Unlike me, she's very proactive, and she reached out to the father of audio description. And I wonder if you know who the father of audio description is. It's a man called Joel Snyder. And Joel is the most wonderful gentleman. I mean, the best description. In Yiddish, you would call him a mensch. He is literally a mensch. And in the 70s and 80s, Joel began to be interested in audio description and formalizing it and putting it into theater. And Joel did more for audio description than any person alive, I believe. He's got a PhD in audio description. Certainly, probably the first person to do so. In fact, almost certainly the first person to get a PhD in audio description. He wrote a book called The Visual Made Verbal. Anyway, Shakila, being as proactive as she was, brought Joel out to South Africa, and Shakila hosted him in Durban and Johannesburg, and I hosted him in Cape Town. And so I hosted him and facilitated him running a workshop, a 3-day workshop on audio description, which I attended. And then I had a day to kill. And I offered to show him around the town. It's a very pretty town. It's a gorgeous town. Because of the mountain, because it's colonial, this interesting architecture. And so I showed him around. And we found ourselves, he wanted to see the Great Synagogue in Cape Town, which I showed him. And we went into the basement, and there was a mock-up of a shtetl. And he talked me through everything. And then we went to the National Gallery, which is in a very beautiful campus of museums in Cape Town called the Government Gardens, they're called. And the Government Gardens, Governor's Gardens, they're called. Anyway, in the Governor's Gardens are a bunch of museums, and in there is the National Gallery. And I had the privilege of spending almost an entire day with the father of audio description, talking me through the various visual arts. Now, I want to add something to audio description. And Georgina Cleage, who I mentioned in the previous section, has written about this in her book, whose name I fear I have forgotten. I can't remember the name of the book. It'll come to me, though. And essentially, we mustn't forget the wonders of the tactile experience, which have a very big role to play in audio description. Because when you can feel something, it adds to the entire picture. So what I'll be doing for you just now is I've already audio described the mountain for you. Hopefully I did a decent job. And I'd like to describe a couple of things for you to show you how well audio description can be transmitted to a blind person. Because the only reason I can describe what I'm going to describe to you is because it was so well described in the first place. I have a rather good memory, and so I'm able, and because I love history, it helps, you see, because I understand context, and it helps a great deal. So if you see a painting and you have no affinity with it, then the description, you might do a decent job, but it'll be quite clinical, really. But if you can relate to the image in some way, I believe it helps. But I don't want to prescribe those, it's not necessary, I suspect. But from my point of view, the reason I remember it well is because I picture it in my head. So let me tell you a classic painting. And Joel Snyder himself audio described this painting somewhere in America. They're actually not in America, it's in Europe, but the actual painting, I suspect. Well, no, mind you, it might actually be in one of your galleries. So I don't know where it lies at the moment, but it's by Titian. Now, Titian was a 16th century painter in Italy, in Florence, and he painted many scenes from Greek mythology. And so this painting is called Venus and Adonis. Now, it's a very green forest scene, and you see the grasslands, but it's very foresty, very green, and you see Venus, who is quite naked, um, and she's sitting on a couch. Now, you might scratch your head a little bit about what on earth a couch is doing in a forest, but don't overthink it. This is Greek mythology, after all, and so Venus, of course, is a senior god in the Greek pantheon. And she's sitting on a couch, quite naked, but she's almost always depicted as naked, by the way. And she's reaching with her right hand, and she's literally clutching at a man who is leaving her. He's walking away from her. He's quick. He's clearly wrenching himself away from her. Her arm is still half on his chest, trying to pull him back. In fact, she's torn his shirt. You can see that his tunic is, in fact, wrenched aside so that you can see his chest underneath. His tunic is rose colored. And he's wearing hunter's garb. He's got what imagines would be skin trousers, quite tight, and they only go up to just above his calves, and he's got great big muscular calves. He is, of course, Adonis. Adonis is still to this day we talk about a muscular man being called Adonis, and he's got great big calves. He's barefoot. He's holding an enormous 6-foot spear in his left hand. Now remember, he's walking away from her. So he's walking to the right. She's sitting on the left. And in his right hand, he's holding 3 wolfhounds who are straining at the leash. Once again, you can see the musculature in his strong right arm as the leash is wrapped around his arm. And what's interesting is that 2 of the dogs are straining at the leash with their tails wagging and up. And one of the dogs has this tail between his legs. What's that telling us? Now, she's clearly distressed because she's trying to hold him back. Now, I understand, I actually don't know the story very well, but in Greek mythology, this is Adonis's last journey because the reason he's holding a great 6-foot spear is because he's on a boar hunt. He's off to hunt boar. And in the story, he dies just after this incident because he's killed by a boar. And so I think because Venus, of course, is a god, she knows what's going to happen, doesn't she? Um, and so that's why she's holding him back. And just a little bit of extra detail, there's Cupid, the famous Cupid, is lounging on a hillside in the distance. And there's a golden chalice, clearly must have held wine, one imagines, is dashed to the ground in the left. And so that's Titian's Venus and Adonis. And I hope I could visualize that. I've never seen it. Literally never even looked at a picture of it, even if I could see. Um, I've never even had somebody look at the picture and tell me that I'm right or wrong. I think I'm pretty much accurate because Joel Snyder, the father of audio description, described that for me. Well, not for me. He described it. I've heard the recording. I have the recording. It's my favorite painting. And I could do that all day because I know many artworks, statuary and art, and even photography where that they have been beautifully described. So what I'm telling you here
Absolutely,
is that
absolutely, yeah, yeah. So let me just interject as we walk through. So, by the way, do you have access to that Joel Snyder recording of that painting?
I do. I do. I can
You
send it to
do.
you.
You do.
I
Okay.
do.
If
I
you're
do.
sure that you do, then we're actually going to put it in. We're going to put it in right here into the audio. So just give me 1 minute. So actually, listeners, so the listener for sure would want to hear Joel Snyder's
I
interpretation.
I don't think I can play it now though because you wouldn't
No,
hear
no,
it.
I know we can't, but
Oh,
you'll
you
give
know
it to
this. So
me,
I'll send it to
and
you.
I'll
Yeah,
sneak it in by doing this. So we'll say,
yeah, yeah.
so you're going to listen, and now here's Joel Snyder's recording, audio description of that painting. Okay, so
Oh,
here it
cool.
is. Yeah.